You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
Welcome to the 2016 Iowa City Book Festival, presented by the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. We would like to thank the sponsors who made this event possible: the City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa Arts Council, Sheraton Iowa City, the Iowa City Public Library, the Iowa City Coralville Convention and Visitors Bureau, and Iowa Tourism. Today, as part of the panel discussion Indie Authors, we will hear from Rachel Aukes, Erik Therme, Craig A. Hart, Joseph Dobrian, and Eliza David, who will discuss their paths to success as independent authors. The panel is moderated by Andrea Wilson. Rachel Aukes is the award-winning author of 100 Days in Deadland, which made Suspense Magazine's Best of the Year list. She is also a Wattpad star, her stories having over 4 million reads. Erik Therme has thrashed in garage bands, inadvertently harbored runaways, and met Darth Vader.
Darth Vader.
All right. His latest novel is Rest Haven. Craig A. Hart is a stay-at-home father of twin boys, a writer, editor, and magazine best-selling author. He has served as editor-in-chief for the Rusty Nail Literary Magazine and as manager for Sweatshop Media. Joseph Dobrian is an award-winning journalist with more than 30 years' experience. He writes on a broad range of topics, most notably real estate, the debt and equity markets, investment, management, luxury retailing, politics, and sports. He's the author of 3 novels, Hardwired, Ambitions, and Willie Wilden, and the collection of essays Seldom Right, but Never in Doubt. Eliza David was born and raised on the noisy south side of Chicago, but now lives in super quiet Iowa. She is a blogger for Real Moms of Eastern Iowa and has self-published 7 romance novels. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm your moderator. I feel like your host as well, and I'd also like to bring this panel to order. I'm the director of the Iowa Writers House, and we put together this panel. The Iowa Writers House is Iowa City's literary center, and I founded it 2 years ago because I felt like being a UNESCO City of Literature, there was really a need for resources to support writers, a place where workshops could be accessible for people on the weekends who weren't able to be in a full-time MFA, and also just a place for writers to network and to come together and find a way to support each other. Writing is often seen as a solitary thing, but writers need each other, need the network, and need support. So it's been my great pleasure to direct that nonprofit for the last year and a half, and also my great pleasure to work with the UNESCO City of Literature on this festival. And this panel in particular is near and dear to me because we have with us today all Iowa authors. And so in the tangible reality of making a dream come true, these are people who have done it and are here to share a little bit about their stories. And we'll do about 30 to 45 minutes of the panel, and then we'll take questions from you. And we're excited to, I think, answer those. And we'd like to ask you at that time to use the microphone down front because this is all being recorded for City Channel TV. So with that, I'm going to have each one of you, if you could, just tell a little bit about yourself and about your publications. And we can start with Joseph.
Okay, I've been writing for my living for about 33 years now, and didn't start writing novels until, well, I had been writing novels since I was knee-high, but I hadn't started publishing them until 2011. That was my first published novel. So I guess I'm like Brahms in that respect. I got started a little late. But what I write is literary fiction, which basically means fiction that you write to impress other writers.
That's a perfect definition.
Yeah, and as such, there is not a huge market for it. So I never expect to make a heck of a lot of money off of my novels, and so far I've not been disappointed. Nonetheless, they are just incredibly good literature.
Fabulous.
Hello, my name is Erik Therme. I'm not a very good free-flowing public speaker, so I wrote out a little thing, so I'm just going to read that, so bear with me. For me, my love of writing started with two things. The first was discovering the book Misery by Stephen King in my junior high school library. It's a pretty gruesome book, especially for a 12-year-old kid, but it definitely kick-started my love of writing. The second thing that happened is my parents decided to buy a typewriter. By that point, I had read multiple Stephen King books, and I thought it would be cool to try writing my own stories. I mean, how hard could it be? I was 12. Needless to say, almost all my tales are pretty lousy because I didn't know what I was doing, but I was hooked. I loved the act of writing. I loved the way the words looked on the page. I loved that they were my words from my head. So I kept at it, my writing slowly improved, and I started working on novels. And eventually I wrote a novel that I thought was good enough to be published, and then spent the next 10 years going after literary agents. I had a lot of close calls, but at the end, everyone always passed, so I decided to take the plunge into self-publishing. And it was great. I wasn't selling thousands of books, but my work was being read, people seemed to enjoy my writing, and I was perfectly content with the way things were going. Then, out of the blue, I got an email from a woman saying she had come across my book, read it, and wanted to acquire it for Thomas Mercer Publishing. Needless to say, I was perfectly content with that new development as well. When I finished my second novel, it wasn't a good fit for Thomas and Mercer, so I submitted it to Kindle Scout, which at its core is basically a publishing contest. You upload your book to their site, people have 30 days to vote on whether or not it should be awarded a publishing contract, and at the end of that time, the Scout team makes a decision. I was fortunate enough to be selected, and my second book was released in April of this year. So as of right now, my third book is being considered by a different publisher. I'm also working on a fourth book, which I hope to have completed by the end of next year.
Your books.
Oh, I've got Rest Haven and Mortem.
My name is Craig Hart, and first I wanted to say thanks to the Iowa Writers House. I had a great talk with Andrea, I just got that right today, about the Writers House, and so I'm fairly new to the area, so I was really excited to hear about what the Writers House is doing. And so if all of you don't know what the Writers House exactly does or what it has planned for the future, then contact them, and I think you'll be as excited as I am about the future. I began writing, I suppose I was about 15 years old. And much like Erik was saying, it came out of my love of reading first, and thought that this would be a great thing for me to try. And I spent the whole circuit of getting rejections, and I still have a folder full of rejection slips from places like various kids magazines that I'd submitted to over the years, and ended up taking a break from writing because it got really discouraging because I was in my teens still. Like, well, this probably isn't for me. So I took a brief foray into professional music. I was a professional pianist for a while. I got some gigs. And then carpal tunnel struck, and that kind of put an end to that dream. And so I began thinking, well, now what am I going to do? It has to be something in the arts, something related to creativity, because that's my dream. My parents thought, maybe you should think about doing something that might make you some money. And I thought, no, I'm going to try this, because I knew better, of course. So I went back to my first love of writing, published a few books, self-published them, and that wasn't going well. And I had to stop and think about why it wasn't going well. And there were other people who were self-publishing who were doing quite well. And I had to come to the realization that they just weren't very good. I had fallen into the trap that I think a lot of people do with self-publishing and indie publishing, where they don't take the time to get their manuscript ready. They don't take the time to prepare properly, and they put it out there simply because they can. And that's the double-edged sword of self-publishing and indie publishing. It's pretty easy to do it in terms of getting it out there, because there are somebody, if you can pay somebody to do it, if you pay them enough money, they'll do it, and you can have it out in 30 days. But whether or not you should is the other thing. And so I was putting my stuff out before I should. I had to take a step back, re-examine what I was doing. Ended up going to college, taking writing classes, and meeting a lot of people. And through that honesty and hard work, I began to improve my craft to a point where it was actually a viable option. And so I took with Becoming Moon, the same route that Erik talked about with Kindle Scout, that's how we met. I think he actually found me. Were you just perusing on the site? And
Stalking other authors.
Stalking other authors. It's kind of it's exactly what I thought.
Network and multi.
That's how we all meet.
Like, hi, Craig, I'm stalking you. Want to meet for lunch? And so I said, sure. So we met downtown at Zamerik's, and I started talking, and he sort of opened the door for me to a lot of what's going on in the area, because as it turns out, I grew up in Michigan, and my wife went to school here, and that's how I ended up here. She now works at the University of Iowa. But I began to understand and realize that Iowa is a reading state. It is a state of people who read. And I found that incredibly exciting. And I can't tell you how many people I've met, how many authors I've met who have the same dream that I had. So that's absolutely thrilling, and I am absolutely excited to be here and to get involved in everything that's happening. So thank you all for coming, and I look forward to your questions and hearing what the other panelists have to say.
So thanks. I am Rachel Aukes, and I have about 10 books out and short stories and about a half dozen anthologies. And I started off in comic books when I was a kid. Absolutely loved them. I grew up in on a farm outside a small town named Ryan. It's half hour north of Cedar Rapids or so. And anyway, I'd like to boast that I had the town's largest comic book collection, because it was probably also the only one. But I also had an electronic typewriter at the time. My mom had got me one, and I just loved it. And I wrote a lot of stories when I was younger, but never really, as I got older, I didn't think it was a career choice, so I just followed and went into computer programming because I knew that that's what people do to make money. And then my careers evolved and things, but eventually I hit the point in my 30s where I just felt like I was going to suffocate unless I got back into writing and try something. So I said, what the heck? And I just started writing my first book with no prep work, no planning, no, besides some college education on creative writing, no good process in place. So obviously that book got rewritten a lot of times, and I learned a whole lot of the rules and writing process the wrong way, but I did learn them. I'm just not the fastest learner. First books sold, they were paranormal romance. I don't know why, it was just what I was in the mood for at the time, and sold that to a smaller house. After that, I did a sci-fi series that sold to a mid-sized house, and then after that, I decided, the self-publishing thing is really, starting to hear about that a lot, so I said, what the heck? I'll write a zombie trilogy. And so I took this zombie book and I said, okay, what if we took Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy and put zombies in it instead of down in hell? And so I basically brought hell up to earth and wrote the trilogy, the full, hell, Purgatory and Paradiso, all in that trilogy. And that was a blast. The reason why I self-published it and knew I was going to self-publish it from the beginning is I did not think any house would have any interest in something that, off the wall. Because houses, one thing you'll notice is publishing houses have very narrow guidelines of what they look for on stories. They want things to fit what they sell and market, because they have a niche, and every house does very good at their niche. And I knew, taking some classic medieval poem and throwing zombies in it probably wasn't going to fit many people's niches. So I went ahead, put that out, had a great time with it. I found it resonated with readers, did really well, and since then that trilogy's wrapped up, but it's gotten me some opportunities I've really enjoyed. So I've done several short stories and done some contracted work through Wattpad is one of my agents, and they help get me through stories. And they connect me with, like Simon & Schuster, I have contracts with them for writing short stories for anthologies, or a movie might be coming out and they'll ask for some content and things. So yeah, the self-publishing's really opened up a great hybrid career for me, where self-publishing, as Craig mentioned, Yeah, Kurt. It takes a whole team. It takes a lot of people, and because you can just click publish and it's out there, but it's a lot of work. And the nice thing with traditional publishing is not quite as much work falls on you. So I really like having the best of both worlds, where I can have some things traditionally published where it takes some things off my hands, but I also don't see royalties for 18 months. And then I like the self-publishing where I have full control over it, but it takes a lot of work, but you get rewarded so much faster. So anyway, before I ramble on too much longer, I've just started a new series. It's called the Fringe series, and Fringe Runner is out. Fringe Station, the book 2 comes out in about 2 weeks. So pretty excited. This one's also self-published, and been having a blast with it. It's if there's any brown coats in here, any fans of Firefly or Serenity, all right, I see a couple. It's in that you'll see that feel within the stories. So.
Hi, I am Eliza David, and the way I like to kind of characterize myself as an author is that I'm a wannabe Jackie Collins in a room full of wannabe John Steinbecks, and that happens quite frequently, but I'm okay with that. I have been a fan of romance writing since I've been reading it and sneaking and reading it as a not so adult child. I think my first romance novel was probably Judy Blume's Wifey, which, if you are a fan of Judy Blume, you probably know her for all of her teenage, young adult stuff, but Wifey is definitely an adult book, and it is one of my favorite books, and it was definitely one of the first books that influenced me to write. I've been a reader, just like most of the panelists here have said, long before I started writing. I've been self-published for 2 years. I decided to write my first novel, which is Cougarette, which I'm giving away as a part of the Iowa Writers House giveaway there. That was my first book, and I decided to write that during NaNo, National Novel Writing Month, which is coming up here in November, and that was my first book. I wrote that in 2015. Since then, that book has spawned 5 additional books in the series, so it is a 6-book series altogether. The reason I decided to self-publish is because my main character is an African-American woman in her 40s, and typically that is not the demographic found in main characters of romance novels, so it was important for me to have a woman of color be represented as smart and sexy and sensual and fun and vibrant, and I think that I've achieved that with Cougarette and its subsequent books. I also self-published a standalone book called Brew Girl, and that is about a feminist who falls in love with a chauvinist. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well, but it's a fun read. And my latest book was just released here on September 30th. It's called Savage, and it is a spin-off of the Cougarette series, which features the best friend of the main character of the Cougarette in her own sexy dalliances, so putting it mildly. I really enjoy self-publishing. One of my favorite parts of self-publishing, which we'll touch on during the discussion, is social media. Any of my readers or friends or family who know me know it's best you just find me on Facebook or Twitter if you want to get in touch with me. And I've used social media as the backbone of my sales and my marketing and my branding, and it has worked stellar for me, and I'm always looking to expand, and it's also helped me reach out to other authors as well. When I'm not writing novels, I'm either blogging. My blog's elizadavidwrites.com. I also blog for 30 on Tap. I've contributed pieces for Real Moms of Eastern Iowa, and I also serve as a co-concierge for the Iowa Writers House, the Scarlet Room, which is the women's fiction romance writing room. So, and on top of that, I work full-time and have a husband and have 2 small kids, so I have a lot going on. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments from the panelists.
I think that's a perfect lead in to my second question is, could you talk a little bit about how, if you balance writing with a day job or any other freelance work, kind of take us through a day or a week in the life of you as a writer?
Okay, well, I have to write every day because that's what I do for a living. I'm a financial journalist. I write mostly for the Wall Street Journal, for J.D. Power, for the Institute of Real Estate Management, for lots of other clients, really. Too many to add up. But if I'm concerning myself with writing fiction, well, my first novel took a long, long time to write because I would set it aside for years. I would give up because I couldn't find an agent, so on, so on. I just wasn't disciplined. It was a good book, as it turned out, but from inception to publication was 9 years, which is too darn long. So when that book came out in the fall of 2011, I said to myself, I am going to publish 4 more books in the next 5 years. That's my deadline. I'm going to tell people about that so that they can hold me to it. And if I fail to meet that deadline, I will embarrass myself. So that was how I did it. I gave myself, said 4 books in 5 years, gave myself deadlines for each one, stuck to them. I can be terribly disciplined when I want to be. Mm-hmm. And that is really what it takes, just tremendous discipline, and you have got to crack the whip over yourself, and with any luck you'll find some people whom you can count on to crack the whip over you and make sure that you don't let them down. So that's my big secret as an independent author. I can publish whenever I like because I founded a press. I don't have to call myself self-published because I have other authors in my stable, which I guess means that I'm a real bona fide independent press. So I can publish whenever I like. So it's a matter of self-imposed deadlines. And another very important thing, which I believe a couple of you touched on, is that it's easy to just publish something, but you've got to make sure that it meets professional standards. If it looks sloppy, if the production values are poor, if it hasn't been proofread carefully, you are going to embarrass yourself.
Joseph, do you work with an independent editor?
Yeah.
Since you're able to work with your own imprint, you bring in a contract editor?
I do. Unfortunately, I don't get the best ones. So, well, even the best produced books will occasionally contain a typo, but that's no excuse. My books all contain 1 or 2 typos, which you won't even notice because you'll be into the rhythm of reading and it won't be that big of a thing. But yeah, they're not perfect.
I think that determination was a great thing to bring up. People often ask about process, and that what is your process like, Erik? For a day in the life, or a week in the life. I know a bit about your office, and I've seen your space, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, like most of us, I'm married. I have two kids, 2 daughters. Fortunately, they're older now, so they're kind of self-sustaining. So I do have the luxury of evenings and weekends. I just kind of go down into my office and work when I can. One of the things that frustrates me sometimes when people say, I love to write, but I don't have time. I mean, it's just like everything else. You prioritize your time. And I mean, if you want to write, you'll write, and you just make time to write. And other things will suffer. I mean, I constantly apologize to my wife. I'm sorry, I'm not up here hanging out with you. Let's do this instead. Let's go do something this weekend or something. But yeah, and for me, it really comes down to just, I always like to say, putting my butt in the chair. I try to do that every day. And sometimes it's for 5 minutes, sometimes it's for 5 hours. But, if you do it every day consistently, I feel the work doesn't get stale. And eventually, I just told a new novelist the other day, a young girl, if you write 1 page a day, at the end of a year, you'll have a book, 365 pages. And granted, rewriting is 90% of the process, but that's a discussion for another time. But the point is that, if you just work on it every day, like Joseph said, the first book I wrote was over the span of many, many, many years, which I think is very common for people to do. So the important thing is you just really got to love what you're writing, because you're going to look at it a lot and you're going to work on it every day. And eventually you'll get to the point where you don't hate it. And then it's ready to be seen by other people. So.
Perfect.
Right till you don't hate it. Yeah, there we go. So I wrote a book about a year and a half ago, a very small book. It's called The Busy Writer, and in that we talk about reasons why books don't get written, even though people desire to. There was a study or a survey done a few years ago, and Joseph Epstein, I think, did it. And he said 280 million people nationwide feel they have a book in them, but only 1 to 3% of those people actually write a book. And only between 1 to 3% of those people will actually get that book published. So a lot of what the busy writer does is dig into what Erik said about people saying, I don't have time to write, and figure out why you don't have time to write. As was mentioned at the beginning of the panel, I'm a stay-at-home dad of twin boys. They keep me pretty busy, and at the end of the day, I'm pretty tired. So what I had to do is sit down and figure out a process of how can I continue to write after they go to bed, during their naps, on the weekends if I can get a few hours. My wife will stay with them. She's been great about that. And one of the things was that I talk about in the Busy Writer book is figuring out what I'm going to write ahead of time. So if they're busy running around and screaming and carry on, I've begun learning how to find kind of a safe place inside my head so that I can think about the current project, think about the characters, get to know those characters while I'm feeding them yogurt or something like that. Get all that set up, and then when I do have a few minutes, I don't have to spend that time trying to figure out what to write. All I have to do, I have that time to actually get the words on the page, and I've just discovered that to be key to that process. The other thing to understand is that everybody works in a different pace. I remember throughout the last few years, I would beat myself up all the time if I didn't have 1,000 words a day, or if I wasn't turning out a certain number of pages. A book can be written in a few months, or it can take years. I don't think there's necessarily a right and a wrong way to do it. I don't think there's any reason to feel bad about it taking one way or the other, as long as you know that yourself, that you're being artistically fair to yourself and fair to your writing at the same time. So that it happens differently for different people. But just finding the time, or making sure that you are as efficient as you can with the time that you have is key, and you can do miracles with that in just a few minutes if you are able to take that. And Joseph mentioned discipline. I mean, that's key, and learning how to make the most of the time has been key for me.
Rachel, 10 anthologies and all those novels. I am interested to hear about your process, because you're getting the work done.
Well, thanks. I was lucky up front. I got a couple contracts, and they were aggressive turnaround times on the contracts, so it forced me to develop a good process. But really what it came down to was my mindset. You know, if you treat writing like a hobby, then it's a hobby. And everyone around you is going to treat it as just a hobby, that it's not that important, that whatever they want done is important. So as soon as you treat writing as a career, even if it's only a 10-hour-a-week career, if you still switch over to that mindset and say, okay, I'm a sole proprietor of this writing company, and this is what I need to accomplish, even if I don't see revenue off this book for 2 or 3 years down the road, it's still very important to produce the product that people want to read. So to me, it was all about setting the mindset, and then it makes me more excited because I know, so I still have a day job too. I work full-time and travel full-time, so I do have a lot of time in airports and hotels to write, which works out good, but I get a lot of distractions too. And so it really is, once you get that mindset going, everything else just falls in place. If you know you want to write and you have enough passion for it, then everyone will slowly start to see that, and they'll start to support you over time, and or you find more friends that do support you, and you just get the writing done. So, thanks.
I start my days at 5 a.m. every morning without fail, and my first hour that I'm awake is dedicated to writing, whether I'm working on a manuscript in progress or if I'm blogging, I'm writing during that 5 o'clock hour. The 6 o'clock hour is dedicated to the hustle. It's dedicated to marketing. It's dedicated to scheduling my tweets. It's dedicated to answering emails. I answer more emails before 7 a.m. than I think is allowable. But I have 3 email accounts. I have my personal account, I have my author account, and I have my day job account. So by 7 a.m., my 2 children are awake and I'm in mommy mode and I'm getting them ready to go to school. I drop them off and then I go work 8 hours. During those 8 hours, I'm constantly thinking about writing. I've tried to compartmentalize that part of my life, but I am a believer in a little bit of what Rachel was just saying. I'm a believer in the day job and the dream. Like, my day job is to financially fund the dream and to financially support my family and all of the responsibilities I have, but the dream is always constantly going. So when I get home from work, I'm back in mommy mode, back in, helping my husband with our children, getting them ready. And then I try to sneak in a little writing here and there, or some reading, which I think also aids in the writing process. But for me, my life is very much a schedule. The time is precious. Every minute is precious. And if I'm devoting that to my family, I'm devoting that to them. If I'm devoting it to the day job, I'm devoting it to that. And if I'm devoting it to the dream and the hustle, then I'm devoting it to that. But if you want to write, you do have to make the time, and there are going to be some sacrifices, and there are going to be some times where you feel like you're not giving other aspects of your life as much attention as you can. But if you don't, as Rachel said, if you treat it like a hobby, people are going to view it as such. But if you treat it like a dream and the hustle and what's motivating you to be a better person, that's the way I look at my writing, then you will give it the time that it needs and deserves.
These next few questions, we can jump around a little bit, or if you kind of feel compelled to answer, you're welcome to. But how did you know which way you should go with publishing? A couple of you touched on this, but how did you know that self-publishing was the right way, or a small independent imprint? What was it that drove that decision? Does anyone have something they want to share?
I can do it. So I started out chasing traditional publishing, and I had a couple of excruciatingly horrible experiences. One publisher took the manuscript and accepted it. They did a good job editing, but then they ended up putting this absolutely horrendous cover on it. I don't know why they would ever do that. And I tried to deal with them, and they're like, no, it's ours now, so good luck. But at the same time, they expected me to go out and push the book. And that was when I couldn't get behind it because it just looked so horrible. And yet you're stuck in this contract. And then the second one, I didn't learn my lesson, found another fly-by-night place who took another manuscript under a very long contract, and they put a really high price tag on it. And so I figured out later what their game was, is that they would put really high prices on the books, too high for the public to purchase, but authors who didn't know better would buy a lot of their own books to sell. And that's how they were making their money. And after some legal maneuvering, I did finally get that book back, but it wasn't easy. And now that didn't necessarily sour me on traditional publishing, because I know that a lot of that was my fault for being naive and for not doing proper research. So you want to do that. But it did spur me into thinking and investigating other methods. And the self-publishing and indie publishing, I began to looking into that and found that there are a lot of options out there. If you were motivated enough, and if you had certain knowledge, or at least knew people who could help you, you could put out a very quality product. I have this book. Well, it's the first book in a new series, actually. And that is a completely self-published book. The cover and interior editing, that was all done by different people coming together and putting together that product. It's something I'm really proud of. It's first in a series set in northern Michigan. But it's an example of what you can do if you put the time into it. So to me, having the control of my product is key, and that's been something that has been absolutely vital to have in order to fully get behind my product and feel like I can give it everything I can.
Is that a CreateSpace book?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. So if you aren't familiar, CreateSpace is the self-publishing arm of Amazon.com. And it sounds like what you've been able to do through that then is have a lot more agency to make decisions on your own versus those original contracts where you were getting covers and editing that just weren't to your liking with the book you were hoping to put out.
Correct, yeah. And everybody's different. I'm the type of person that I like to have a lot of control over it. And that may not be for everybody. Maybe they want somebody to make some of those decisions.
But control was important to you.
Yeah, it is.
Joseph, something to
I
add?
agree. Control is very important. That's one of the reasons why I decided to form my own publishing house, because I've got total control over the cover, the story itself, and so on. When I was first working on my first novel, Willie Wilden, after I'd done a few drafts of it, I started peddling it to agents, and none of them were interested. And I said to myself, well, if I were an agent, I wouldn't be interested either. This is a first novel by a guy who is not known for fiction. It's 160,000 words. A lot of it has to do with football. No, that ain't gonna sell. And I said to myself, I'm on the back nine of life now. I was past 50 at the time. I said to myself, do you want to go to your grave being the guy who was always trying to get his damn novel published, or do you want to publish the damn thing? So that was the way I went. I just made sure that it was a very professional job, that it looked like something that had come out of a reputable publishing house. And no, I'm not the world's best marketer, never will be, don't have the time for a lot of marketing. But frankly, just having it out there, knowing that I did good work, is a lot more important to me than how many copies I've sold. I'd like to sell a lot of copies. Of course, I would like to be famous. But much, much more important is the satisfaction of having written something good. I know I make a good living off of my other types of writing, so.
That was going to be my comment, is it seems like with your writing, because you're able to do such continual freelance, your books are like a wonderful resume piece and continual biography for your abilities.
Right, and they make terrific corporate gifts. And so I consider the
You've
copies.
got what you wanted out of the process,
Yeah.
which is what I think everyone is kind of showing in a different way, is it's important to know what you want out of a publishing experience. You know, is your goal to have a book for friends and family? Is your goal to be famous? Is your goal to make money? Or is your goal to work as a writer in such a way that you enjoy the process more than are sort of counting?
Oh, mind you, I
finance?
make myself famous locally. Don't think otherwise. I make myself infamous, and that's one of the secrets. You know, make yourself notorious. Do it by, there are various ways you can do it. John Waters, the film director, wrote a wonderful article on the various ways that you can make yourself famous. I generally do it by being a contrarian, by publishing politically controversial pieces in the local paper, by appearing on talk shows. This is a very lefty liberal town, and everybody knows that I'm so far to the right that I fall off the edge of the flat earth. And it helps. I get invited to parties because people are saying, you got to meet this guy. You won't believe the stuff he says. And also, you know, people are surprised when they read my fiction to find that my strongest characters are the women. You know, I get called racist and sexist and God knows what else all the time. But if I say it myself, I do really strong women characters. I don't know why that is.
Erik, do you want to talk to us a little bit about marketing? And I'm asking you specifically because you've done a wonderful job marketing your own work. Has Amazon and Kindle provided any support, or your first publisher, or how do you kind of tackle what percentage of that has been all you?
You know, it's such a tough question to answer because, you know, I have people who I know are self-publishing. They're just killing it, selling way more copies than I am with the publisher. And what I've honestly come to realize is that in a lot of ways it's a long game. You know, every book you release, you get new fans, you develop that following. And there's a guy, Rachel, I know, who traditionally published with Simon & Schuster, was so unhappy with the experience, he self-published himself then, just killed it with the second series, and then he got signed on for a huge deal with another publisher that took him on after that. But I mean, he just consistently produced good work. And the reality is, so much of marketing is kind of like what Eliza said, is just social media, getting your word out. And, you don't know what's going to make your book, they always use the term go viral. But I mean, word of mouth is huge. And if people like it, they tell their friends, and they tell their friends, they tell bloggers. And I worked really hard initially to develop that fan base of just reaching out to bloggers, reaching out to other people. Social media was huge. And yeah, I feel like the interesting thing with my story is when I did self-publish Mortem, no one knew who I was, and I had wanted a traditional publishing deal, and I finally just kind of relented and said, okay, I'm going to self-publish. I just want to be read, kind of like what Joseph said. You just want to do your best work and get it out there. And then that's what actually, working so hard for reviews and sales is actually what got me noticed by the traditional publishing house. And, I'd love to say with them I've gone on to sell thousands of millions of copies, but it really doesn't work that way. The bottom line is I'm with a house, but I'm still, a low man on a totem pole. And it's always going to go back to the work, how good is the work? And you just keep writing books, and you just, hope eventually one of them's just going to resonate with everyone like, your other books haven't, and then you're just really going to take off. So.
Eliza, you talked earlier about social media, and what I also hear in your story is that you found a niche, and you found a group of audience that was underserved. How does your sort of marketing really approach meeting what those kind of readers want? How do you talk with them every day? How do you keep them excited?
Sure. So I like to divvy my social media up into 3 parts. 1 part promotion, 1 part engagement, and then 1 part just random posts to show more of my human side. As Joseph mentioned that he's so far to the right, I'm so far to the left. I mean, and so I've been having fun with my random posts about the election, and that's really gotten some people interested in me, thereby interested in my books. I try to keep the promotion of my books kind of just not hidden, but you never want to be on social media just simply to say buy my book. Because I actually follow an author whose Twitter feed is nothing but reposts of their book, and it's kind of annoying because it's
there's no story in
exactly.
it at that point.
People don't want to buy a product. They want to know the human behind the product, especially if you're using social media as your engine. And I make it very important. It's important to me that if someone tweets me or comments on a Facebook post, that I respond to them. So, I don't ignore comments. I don't feed trolls online. My block hand is strong. Like I'm not going to feed any trolls online because that's not my brand. My brand is not to sit and fight with someone about my book or about politics, but I will comment about it. So you have to be when you're using social media to help build your brand online. You definitely need to be cognizant of that. For me, as a Black woman, my politics are in my everyday demeanor, so I don't mind talking politics, whereas it may not be the move for another author. Likewise, again, engagement, you want to make sure that you're talking with your fans, you're talking with readers, you're talking with potential readers. If someone says something like, hey, so what's your book about? Retweet that and respond to them. And
literally you're having direct conversations with your readers
absolutely.
Every day, all the time.
It's important to be a human, be a brand, but be a human first.
Rachel, you mentioned earlier the royalties in the world of sort of traditional versus self. Would you mind talking a little bit more about that and sort of explaining how royalties work and when they kick in?
Sure. So from traditional standpoint versus self-published. So self-published, there is no royalties. You are making income or revenue, a certain percentage based on what's left over from the vendor that you're released through. So say if you publish at Amazon, they might take 30% or 70%, and then you get the remainder about 45 days later, which is incredible. When you're self-published, to see money that fast in the creative world is unheard of. That's why self-publishing is so enticing, besides the control, aspect, because, I love having control over my covers and whatnot. But so self-publishing, you do see a lot greater amount because you're with self-publishing, you're paying people up front. You're paying your editor out of your own pocket, your cover designer, your proofreader. You've got a team of people that is all out of pocket before you hit the publish button. So that means once it's published, you're making all of that revenue. Now, with a traditional house, they have a whole team of people that they need to pay. So what they'll do is they'll pay you in advance against royalties once you sign a contract with them. And don't think you're going to get rich. They're very small. I've had everything from a $300 royalty to a $6,000 advance against royalties. And so enough, it's their way of trying to pay you just to get by until you can start seeing your royalty check. And their royalties then are based on, either ebook or paperback, how it sells. And what I've generally noticed is the smaller the house, the faster you get, the more often you get paid. The larger the house, it seems to take longer. So I know some of my smaller houses, I've been paid every 6 months on advance once I earn out my advance on the royalties. And that doesn't always happen. They say the majority of the time you never earn out your advance. So you never see another penny on your book after that initial advance. But when you do earn out, or when you sell sub-rights, it's nice to start seeing those. But yes, the larger houses, it's not uncommon. You usually get paid about 18 months after you first sold that book. So about every 9 months or so, you get a letter from the publisher saying, here's your latest royalty check. You'll see it in another 6 months. And yeah.
So we talked a little bit about process, we talked a little bit about publishing, we talked about marketing, we talked about contracts. We've got 15 minutes left, and I'd really like to leave that for the audience to come up to the microphone and ask some questions of our panelists themselves. You can ask a general question, or you can direct it to someone specifically or to me, and I'll field it as best I can.
About the social media. I have a Facebook account, but I've only been there a few times in the last few years. It seems to be such a time sink when I want to spend my time other things. I guess there's something called Instagram, or I don't even know what that is. But you've talked about the social media, but can you delve a little deeper and tell us a little bit more about the nuts and bolts? What do you actually do? How do you navigate Facebook for someone who knows very little about it? One of my problems with it is I open it up and the screen is so cluttered, I don't even want to look at it. So convert me.
Okay.
She's going to need a little bit longer.
I won't take up too much time, but social media. So the first thing you want to do before you say, okay, I want to market my book to social media, first of all, you need to know who your audience is. Like for me, I only do, and I try to keep it at 2 channels, Facebook and Twitter. My book is mainly going to be purchased by women over the age of 30 who need something to read while they drink wine.
Your audience.
These women are usually on Facebook or Twitter. Twitter is a great place in general for authors because so many indie authors and traditionally published authors are on Twitter, so it's great for networking for Twitter. But for marketing, for me, it would be Facebook, Twitter, maybe Pinterest as well. So you really have to think about who your audience is. So if you write young adult, if you write dystopian, if you write middle grade, then you might want to take it over to Instagram or Snapchat. Because the younger people are not on Facebook anymore. They're here and there on Twitter, but most of the younger people are on Snap. They're on IG, but that's where you want to go to sell those types of books. If you're selling cozy mysteries, if you're selling cookbooks, if you're selling I would say like Girl on the Train type of women's mysteries, that kind of thing. Pinterest is a great place. Facebook is a great place. With Facebook in particular, what you want to make sure you're doing is that you're not using your personal page for your marketing. What you want to do is establish a fan page, and that is a separate page altogether that is strictly for the selling of your book. So I have a personal page where my mama comments on my children's pictures and all that wonderful stuff, and where my aunties can find me. But then I also have a fan page with over 1,600 followers that's strictly about the book. And it's not connected to my personal page, so I don't have to worry about complete strangers looking at pictures of my children, but it is about the book. So I think with Facebook, you want to make sure you're doing all your marketing on a fan page basis, and those are generally easy to set up. But first and foremost with social media, just realize who your audience is, and then find them and only them on social media. No more than 2 channels.
A lot of people work with publicists for a reason, because not every author or writer wants to be someone who's doing their own marketing. Do any of you work with publicists or have people assisting you on your marketing, or do you all do it alone?
All my self-publishing I do alone. I have been looking at hiring a publicist or a personal assistant. Traditional house, like with Simon & Schuster, they offer a publicist, and it's nice because they offer coaching and will check in with me. Amazon does that too. I've released through them a couple times.
Anyone else work with anyone that helps them with their marketing? Because learning, all of these social channels is really an intense undertaking, and I really understand that question from the perspective of, I want to write, not be a marketer. And as someone who, spends the majority of her time working on marketing for an organization that supports these writers, I know that can really kind of take away from your time as a writer. And so not everyone can be the whiz that Eliza is, and she's owning this.
And I will say that if you want to, there are tools that you can use to basically do your marketing for you on social media while you do whatever else you're doing, specifically writing. I use Hootsuite, as I mentioned, during my 6 a.m. hour every morning. I use Hootsuite, which is a free application. You can get it upgraded for a price, but you can schedule your tweets. Now, I wouldn't recommend scheduling all of your tweets. I mean, nobody wants to follow a machine. But if you schedule at least 5 tweets dispersed throughout the day when you know you're going to be busy writing or working or doing something other than being on social media, Hootsuite is a good application for that as well.
One of the things I'd really like to do with the Writers' House is to develop a support arm that operates as kind of a marketing opportunity for writers to work with, because I really understand how important that is to have, and how at the level where you're self-published, it would be easier for you to work with someone that we helped find versus everyone sort of being out on their own trying to find freelancers. And that way we could also train some marketers who work specifically in the world of books. So hold on that one, and there may be some eventual announcements, I hope, in the future. Anyone else have a question they'd like to ask?
One thing about getting a publicist is that even if you have a good publicist, you still have to be willing to do the work. They might set up a book tour for you, but then you've got to go out there and travel and show up at Barnes & Nobles all over the country. And frankly, that's not something I'm prepared to do. I do not like to travel. I like it less and less as I get older. So I rely on stuff that I can do from here. I've got a talk show on local TV where I plug my book incessantly. I have a regular column in the local paper where I piss off 3/4 of the town, so at least they know I'm there. I just do what I can from my my hometown on radio, TV, newspapers, Facebook. Not a Twitter guy yet. I don't know if that's quite right for me, but I do use the social media as best I can.
You'd be limited to 140 characters, Joseph.
Yeah, that's right. That would not work for me.
I was just going to add, too, that, when I first was trying to get a name known, I actually like marketing. I realized that it was something I really enjoyed doing. And it got to the point where I was trying to think of anything I could do. I was going around to laundromats and leaving bookmarks and hanging up things on bulletin boards, stuff I was probably just spinning my wheels. But it got to the point where I got so addicted to it that I felt like I had to be doing something, doing more. I actually spent one stint where I wrote 100 newspapers in Iowa, just asked for, hey, I'm a new author with a new book, anyone interested? 100. And I got back 2 responses. And I was thrilled because it was only 2, but out of, Iowa, I mean, I got 2 places to respond to me. I contacted libraries, all the libraries in Iowa, asked them to, we'd be interested in getting a free copy of your book. I mean, I reached out to local bookstores. So, I mean, there's always a lot you can do. And like I said, I got to the point where now that I've kind of got a following, I don't do that as much. But I mean, right in the beginning, I really did hit that hard, and I really enjoyed doing as much as I could. So yeah.
Craig, how did you find those people who helped you do your layouts, both the interior and the cover? Because I think your books are beautiful, and as someone who is really attracted to great design and has a design degree graphically, you've clearly found some great people to be on your team.
This one I did. Over the years, I've worked with various people and have learned a lot, and so now I've gone to the point where I can put something together that doesn't want to make me puke when I see it. So now I'm to that point. Now, as far as editing, that was important to me because I've read so many self-published books, and then a couple decades ago or so, 15 years, I would have been putting out books that you read it and there are typos on every page, which Joseph mentioned. There's going to be a typo or two, but this was just apocalyptic. So now editing has become so important to me. And so what I did was I found online 4 or 5 different editors. I wrote a short story, and I sent the same story to every single editor. And they all sent them back. Then I could compare the job they had done on that same work. And I settled on one person whose skill matched the price I could pay. And I've been very happy with her, and she's done all my editing. So online has been key, but you have to do your homework online, because just because somebody is online, I mean, you can throw up a web page and say, I'm going to design your book, but you have to look into their portfolio and use a little common sense as well.
To add on to that, price doesn't always equal quality. So there's some very high-end editors, and my proofreader is very reasonable, but yet she does easily the same quality of work as probably other, she's a fraction of the cost of what my copy editor is, but I consider them both equal in quality and expertise. So so definitely use what Craig did and send off samples if you are looking at hiring your own editor or proofreader.
Do you want to come up to the microphone?
Do you do audiobooks?
The question was, does anyone on the panel do audiobooks?
Yes, I do. I work through Audible, which is owned by Amazon, and I hire direct. I'll pay in advance for the narrator, and I've done it for both my Deadland books as well as the Fringe series. And Audible is my second highest revenue generator for my self-published works. So without a doubt, it is a very hot area to get into, because I think more and more people are listening to audiobooks.
So essentially you are going ahead and putting the money up front to have a reader recorded and to have that audiobook created? Yes. Wonderful. Anyone else? Final question? Well, I want to thank all of our panelists. Rachel came the farthest today from Des Moines. Very appreciated. Appreciate everything that you all contributed today, and to all of you for coming to the festival and for this panel. If you have any questions afterwards, you're welcome to come to the Writers House website and send us an email. And you're also invited to come to the historical tour at 10 tomorrow and our open house from 12 to 1:30. Thank you to everyone. Have a lovely evening.